Eyes on Longmont, offering a diversity of topics about our community that will inform and entertain you. We invite you to sit back and enjoy this edition of Eyes on Longmont.
Hi, my name is Bill Butler. In 1995, I became the first park archaeologist at Rocky Mountain National Park. When I got there were about 70 known prehistoric sites. I secured some money and got some people from the University of Northern Colorado to help me with a survey. By the time I left, there were over 400 sites in the park. Now, it's these 400 sites in the survey that allows me now to tell the story of the park. First of all, the park is in the southern Rocky Mountains. In northern Colorado. Most of you know where this is. It's only a few miles to the plains, North Park or Middle Park. North Park and Middle Park were fought over in historic times by many Indian tribes because of the abundance of food in the parks there. Even though the park has Long's Peak at 14,000 feet, most of the occupation is between 8,000 and 12,000. It is high, it is cold, it is a summer occupancy in prehistoric times because of the cold in the mountains. I once asked a Ute elder, I said, where would you build a house in the Kawanichi Valley? And he said he wouldn't. He says, too high, too cold, too much snow, and all the animals that they depend on for food had left and gone down the mountain. Well, duh, made sense to me. Now, at the end of the Pleistocene, the glaciers are starting to retreat from the park. It is still cold. This is what it looks like probably at that time. To give you another idea how cold it is, this is Forest Canyon Pass. It's one of the major passes. If you look at the date there, this is May, and you still can't cross that pass. The earliest people we know about in the park were Clovis, and this is the earliest well-documented prehistoric culture in North America. We have about 5 of these points from the park, no sites, just points. But what this does tell us, because we have found them in the passes, is that as soon as the glaciers retreated and the passes were open, these people were there. And these people, of course, are the mammoth hunters, and here's your hairy mammoth. Following the Folsom, or Clovis, were the Folsom. That's Folsom on the right. You wonder why the change from the big points to the little points. Well, it's a change in the animal species that people are hunting. The mammoths are gone, and now you got bison. But look at that bison in the middle. That's bison antiquus, also known as bison latifrons. Look at the regular bison on the right and the man stand there. Antiquus is a huge animal. It takes a lot to try and bring one down. With an elephant, it's easy to spear them. They're not that fast, but bison are fast and they're wary. You can't get close to them. And the method you use to get them, of course, is an atlatl. On the right are the atlatls and their darts. Atlatl is a throwing stick. There is a handle on one end and then a hook on the other, and the hook goes into the back of the darts. We don't call these arrows, we call them darts. On the left, you can see how you throw them. The motion is like throwing a football. You can throw them a long way. The record, believe it or not, is 250 yards. That's with a titanium arrow, though, this special kind of thing. It's easy to throw these things 100 yards, no problem at all. The problem comes in accuracy. You have to learn how to throw these things over many years to get good at it. When I was a seasonal ranger at Mesa Verde, we had a little kid in the park, and he suckered us into throwing atlatl darts at cardboard boxes in the middle of the parking lot. He bet us $1 he could hit it. We bet he couldn't. He moved the thing again, said double or nothing. We said sure. Well, before long, we lost all our beer money. He had been throwing the atlatl since he was about 5 years old, and that's the secret. You got to grow up throwing these things. After all, your life and your dependence is going to depend on how well you can hunt with these things. Are there atlatls today? Of course. Here they are right here. You've seen these people throw these in the park. It's the same principle. It's the lever arm that makes a difference. My neighbor is 5 foot 2 inches tall, and she could throw the ball over the fence of anybody in the park. She's something else. Now, the thing about Folsom is there's no Folsom in the park or the surrounding mountains. And the reasons are not well understood. One explanation is a resurgence of the glacial conditions of the Pleistocene. The other is that the Folsom are bison hunters, and it's much easier to make a living on the plains where there's a lot of bison in the park. But I show that here because one of the things that came out of this survey is this absence of occupation at this time, and that's important. Following the Folsom is the altithermal period and the early Archaic. The altithermal, high heat, intense drying on the plains, no grass, no bison, and no people. There's only 1 or 2 known early Archaic sites in the whole Great Plains because of the drying. Not only was it hotter and drier, there's a change in the moisture patterns at this time. If you want to know what global climatic change is going to be like, look at the altithermal. It's a good model for it. Now, the thing about the early Archaic people is they leave the plains and they go to the mountains, or they go to the eastern woodlands where it's wetter. I mean, the Rocky is a refugium for these people. And these are the points we find in the park. The Mount Albion on the left are very common in the park. There were lots of early Archaic occupations in the park. The park is more moist at this time, even though the plains are dry. There's more food and everything for the people in the park. Now, before we go any farther, have you ever wondered how archaeologists tell time from arrowheads? Well, look at this thing, look at the points on the left. What do you see? They're just points. There's not much information there. But if you look at the bases, how different they are. This is where the arrows and points are hafted to a shaft. They are very different. This is a very well understood sequence. It is very well dated. When we find these points on the left with the bifurcated base, we know we're dealing with Middle Archaic people. And the little tiny ones on the right are woodland. Now, the question is, why was there change from the one point to the other? Is this a change in animals again, an environmental change? Actually, it's just a technological change. Because about 150 AD, the bow and arrow comes into Colorado, and pottery comes in at the same time. And both of these come from the eastern part of the United States, maybe from the plains, Kansas, Nebraska, and all is the best guess. But a bow and arrow is much easier to learn how to shoot, and you can get accurate real quick with one of these things. At the bottom is just a bow and arrow set that I found on the internet, the quiver, the arrows, and the bow. Other tools we find in the park are these end scrapers. They're usually hafted on a stick. They used to deflesh a hide so you can make clothing out of it. The flake on the bottom left is the result of flint knapping. The thing about flakes is they are very sharp. There are many movies made showing people taking a deer apart with nothing more than a flake. They are tools in and of themselves. And then on the right is a formal knife. It's probably hafted in a bone or wooden handle. Now, one thing that's missing from here, all this, is all the perishable tools. It is estimated that archaeological assemblages are only about, let's say, 30% of all the tools that people use. There's no cordage, there's no basketry, there's no clothing, no nothing, because that's all stuff that disintegrates. So all we're left with is the stone tools. Now, the other thing besides hunting tools, of course, is groundstone tools. There's a mono matati. The mono on the left I found down to the bridge at the rec center while I was walking my dog one day. It's now down there, but this is what it looks like. The right is a mono and with a matati on it, and this is how it's used. It's usually seeds, berries, or something like that is ground fine, so you can make it into a gruel or something. If you add dried meat to it, then you have pemmican. Pemmican is the Indian power bar. It's throughout North America, pemmican is made. It is a very important food source because it will last a long time. You can make pemmican last up to a year or more. Now, making stone tools, this is a sequence for making a hand axe, but it's the same thing for arrowheads. You find a piece of cryptocrystalline or acrystalline rock, obsidian, chert, chalcedony. You take another rock, like a piece of granite, and you whack it, whack, 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 and before you know it, you have an arrowhead left. Now, the problem with this is it's a one-way street. Once you make a mistake, you cannot correct it. So you better know what you're doing before you start. And people who made their living what gypsum steel really did. Some of the arrows and things are extremely well made, shows a high degree of skill. I have done this. You do not want to watch me do it. Nothing happens. I just make a bunch of detritus. For all the rangers that are in the backcountry, I told them, if you find an arrowhead or something, pick it up. Don't leave it because the public will get it, and just tell me where you got it. And that opened up the park for a tremendous amount of information. Before that, the policy was everybody had to leave everything on the ground except for the archaeologists to get. That is silly. And I changed the policy. We found many, many sites from the backcountry rangers because they find these arrowheads out in the middle of nowhere, and they could pick them up. And then just tell me about them. And of course, I'd record them with their names on. Now they go down in posterity, or whatever we call it, as being the finders of these things. But it is illegal to collect in the park. It's illegal to flint knap in the park. Most people don't know that. We had to run off some people on the west side of the park who have been flint knapping for years. They made a site. That's why we don't allow it, because now we have a site. How old is it? The material they were using was the same stuff the prehistoric people were using. This is not a good deal, because now we can't tell if it's prehistoric or historic. Finally just had to tell them, you got to knock it off. Cleaned up the site. There is a real site there. But now it's confused. It's messed up with this guy that came in. Fortunately, he came in, he was using obsidian. Very little obsidian in the park at all. And most it's all church and chalcedonies and stuff. Pottery is the archaeologist's best friend because it is made with an additive technique. Of all the ways you can make pottery, people don't. They make it in the way that their culture does. And this is important. This is a ceramic tradition. Once you understand tradition, you can trace these people through time. You can trace movement, and also you can get some ideas as to what was going on in the culture, the cognitive studies. Pottery is very important. Here's some pottery that give you an idea of what the difference is, and you can see them readily. On the left are the southwestern ceramics. These are all from the Mesa Verde area. And on the right, up in the upper right corner, is a Colorado Plains woodland pot, conical shape. At the bottom is probably an Apishpa pot or Upper Republican pot from southeastern Colorado. Notice a very different kind of shape, but you can trace this through time. Let me give you another example. If I were to take these two pottery types and put them on a table and ask you to sort them, a bunch of them, you'd come up with this sorting. You see the similarities between the San Ildefonso and the Santo Domingo. Likewise, Hopi Pottery. Hopi Pottery, this is yellow. In fact, the type name is a Jatato yellowware. Notice the pots on the bottom with the feathers. The feathers are Quetzalcoatl. This is the feathered serpent, and it is Aztec in origin. When they brought up corn to the southwest from Mexico, it's one thing to say, here's the corn kernel, you just put it in the ground this way and it'll grow. You have to have the right ceremonies to go with it to make sure it'll grow. Quetzalcoatl is associated with rain, and it's still on the Hopi pottery, but you have to look careful. Some of the feathers are very hard to see, but usually they're always there. Another thing showing cognitive on pottery is a weeping eye motif. In the southern cult, this is the southern part of the United States, this is the weeping eye. It is part of a religious movement throughout the southeast, beginning about 900 AD. I think it runs up to about 1300 or 1400. What this shows is that religion at this time is very widespread. In other words, everybody is doing the same thing. It also shows that there's a tremendous communication network, which you have to have if you're going to do this sort of thing. As far as Colorado, the pottery we have in the park, woodland cord mark on the left, you notice they're conical shape, and the cord marking comes from a paddle that's wrapped with a cord that's used to make the pot. On the right are up Republican. Notice the rim form, and it's globular in shape. Globular signifies that this is a Central Plains tradition kind of idea. The narrow ones on the left is that this is just local woodland stuff. This pottery is widespread. It goes from Kansas all the way into Colorado. There's not a lot of it, but it is here. Some of the other pottery we have is Uncompahgre brownware. This is protohistoric Ute. Archaeologists use a binomial name for pottery. The first name is usually a locational thing, a geographic. The second is descriptive. The Uncompahgre is from the Uncompahgre Plateau, of course, and the brownware describes the pottery. These are two shapes of Ute pottery. It comes in and is dated about 1400 to 1600 AD. Once the Ute get the horse, about 1700, they no longer make pottery. Now, how to make a living? Well, one of the ways you make a living is with a game drive. Now, this is a picture of a game drive on the plains with horses, but actually these drives go back 10,000 years. The idea is to get the buffalo going over a cliff, and they hit the bottom, they die, and you eat. And like I say, it's been going on for 10,000 years. There's something like 60 of these drives known to date on the plains. It's a very common way of making a living. This is head smashed in Canada. Very impressive jump. There's a wonderful museum there that tells you about the whole story of the thing. And on the left shows you how it was worked. You drive the bison. Before they could stop, they're over the edge of the cliff and they fall down and their supper. This is a bone bed that you get from these kind of things. And this one is Ocean Chubbuck. This is in eastern Colorado, and I think the dates on this is something like 7,000 or 8,000 years ago. Very common way to make a living. Do we have jumps in the park? No, we don't. What we do have, though, is we do have game drives, the same idea. These are V-shaped. They're made out of stone. The idea is to get the elk moving up and through the drive to a place where you have an ambush pit. And here's the ambush pit on the right. If you notice at the top of the screen is you see the sky. The idea is you can't see the ambush pit until you're right on top of it. And if you're an elk, it's too late. You know, there's your supper. On the left is what one of the walls look like. And there's usually a stick in the walls, usually with grass or something in it. The idea is just to make a visual kind of wall for the elk. I mean, the elk could step over it, no problem at all. But if you just keep moving slowly till you get them to the bottom of the V, then you can then they'll find out that they're trapped, and you can hunt them. Here's one idea of what the game drive looked like when it was in operation. It's an artist's rendition. We tried to convince the artist that people don't stand around with these things. This is fast and furious. The elk are trying to get away, and people are killing them, and the elk know it. But this gives you an idea of the V shape that's going through there. There are about 60 of these game drives known between Rocky Mountain National Park and Rollins Pass, and they're all high, and they're all in this flat land. Now, another way to make a living in the park is with bighorn sheep. And on your left here, these are hunting blinds. They are about 100 feet apart on lava cliff. The idea is you take advantage of the escape habits of bighorn sheep, and that is they go up the cliff instead of running away. No animal can follow them, and that's the whole idea. So what the Indians came up with is you drive them up to the top of the cliff, and then up the top of the cliff you have a net, which probably went between these two. They're about 100 yards apart, and you get the bighorn sheep in the net, and then you dispatch them. This is a well-known tradition, a way of getting bighorn sheep. It's widely used throughout the Great Basin, and this is a good indication it was also used in the park. In 1913, 3 Arapaho were brought to the park to give names on things. To have a national park, you have to have Indian names. So these people were brought there to give names to things in the park. And that they did. They were accompanied by a man named Oliver Toll. He is a lawyer. He was very good on this trip, because one thing he did is he did not edit anything they said. He wrote it down verbatim. And that's wonderful, because there's a tremendous lot of information in the book that they finally published. On the left are trail cairns. You can see them on the left. They stand up. We call them cairns. The Arapaho call them monuments. They mark the trail. If you notice the trail on the left is a well-beaten trail. That's the Child's Trail going up over the mountain. Usually these trails like this are not prevalent prehistorically. Trails are really corridors. They're a way to get over the mountains, because these kind of trails are the ones you'd find the Park Service would clean up and make sure that the public doesn't fall down and stuff. If you want an idea of what a corridor is like, look at the Santa Fe Trail. In places, it's about 10 miles wide, and that's because one place is wet one year and it's dry, and the wagons went everywhere. It's a corridor. And a lot of these trails in the park are corridors. These are the trails that the Arapaho said were in the park. There's about 20 of them here, and there are probably a lot more. These are the ones they named because they wrote them when they were kids many years ago. I'll give you an idea of what one of these passes and trails look like. This is the Ute Pass. And you've all been over there. If you've gone up Highway 24 going up to Woodland Park from Colorado Springs, you've gone over the Ute Pass, and this is the old trail is what it follows. These guys are all duded up in their best clothes and probably didn't wear that on everyday wear. The Ute tell an interesting story. They said when you go up a pass, that you're very quiet and very careful because this is a dangerous time. Going down the path, you're safe and you sing and you party, and it's just a whole perceptive about where they could get in trouble with people, with aggression. But anyway, that's the Ute Pass. Where'd they live? This is a wickiup, found in 1979. I took a picture of it when I was up in the park, what's left of it. These are temporary shelters. They're very easily made. You can make these in about an hour. One person can do it if you put it in the trunk of a tree, or two people if you put them together. Very good shelters. Here's some at the top of the picture that were taken at the turn of the century. Hallett's Wickiup, just outside the park, and the one near Walden, up in the right-hand corner. We were sitting around one day after work, and we asked everybody, how long does it take to make one of these darn things? So we grabbed, there was a bunch of trees down from a electrical line clearing operation, and so we decided we'd make it. It takes you maybe an hour to make one of these, and one person can do it in an hour. We had a lot of help doing this thing. In fact, if you look at the bottom right, you see all these people packed in there. It's like the old Volkswagen thing. How many people can you get in the Volkswagen? How many can you get in the Wickiup? This is too big a Wickiup. The Ute looked at it and they said, nah, it's got to be shorter. The big ones like that are too hard to put the fronds on the top. Indeed, they are. But they're just covered with pine boughs, is all they are. But anyway, that's the Wickiup. We don't get teepees in the park. And the reason is, when the Indians get the teepees, they have the horse. They're not spending a lot of time in the park. Also, if you look at the teepee on the right, you notice it's held down with tent pegs. Pegs don't leave an archaeological record. Earlier structures lined with rocks. The rocks are there, and you pull up the tent, you get these called teepee ring circles. They're all over the plains. But when they start using pegs, you don't get it anymore. And the reason you get pegs is you get metal tools, and it's easier for them to make it. And you notice in both these pictures are horses, and you need horses to drag the teepees. Everybody's heard things called lodgepole pine. The park has tons of it, and it was harvested for the Indians for lodge poles, or for teepees. We once aided the Arapaho that came up with the Forest Service. They get a bunch of lodge poles so they could have a ceremony out on the plains. Very important thing. In summary, the prehistory of the park is basically what you see here. Big points to little points. Ceramics coming in late. The Adelante is in there. Occupation in the mountain, the altithermal, nobody on the plains. This is the basic cultural sequence for the park. It is repeated elsewhere throughout North America, throughout Western North America. There are changes in other parts of the country where some of the archaic doesn't exist or the woodland doesn't exist. And that's what Rocky looks like from the plains. Thank you.